Okay, so this is a very easy tier list to make. There are basically 4 god tier decks right now, and all of you are going to be like, no, yeah, I can see that. And then 4 up-and-coming decks that I think definitely deserve to be talked about. So let's just jump into it. The first one is Soul Demon Hunter. Soul Demon Hunter is the best deck in the game. Simple to play, ton of burst, good card draw, solid removal with things like Blade Dance and even the Shard Shatter Mystic and Sociologist. One of its worst matchups, Guardian Animals Druid, was just nerfed. Yes, Quest Druid does do okay into it, and it is going to be on this list, but it's not played enough to where you really have to worry about it. This deck beats Rogue, Mage, and Warrior, and even Hunter, which are a lot of highly played classes and decks. It really only loses to Paladin, so you just gotta pray you don't get against that, but basically beats everything else. It's crazy. You have really good turn 4-5 plays with the Marrow Slicer into Glavebound Adept or Soul Shard Lapidary. If you think about it, Marrow Slicer into Lapidary is in total 13 damage over 2 turns, and you get a 5-5 on the board. Not to mention the fact that if you do it later, you can have really good board wipe with Blade Dance. So overall, this deck is extremely powerful. It has very few bad, it has one bad matchup, and then one that's kinda bad but doesn't see that much play, which is Druid. And it's got decent early game as well, with Spirit Jailer, Wandmaker, Mana Feeder Panthera, and a couple of other good early game cards like Chaos Strike and Warblades to keep you from losing board early. It's such a good deck. I'm currently 21-9 with it. It's ridiculous. Number 2 is Libroom Paladin. I think that this deck is very close to Tempo Mage or Small Spell Mage, whatever you want to call it, and the only reason I think this deck is better is because there's very little RNG in it. The only RNG is really first day of school. Other than that, everything is basically based on your play. If you play perfectly, you will perform with this deck. I think that it's slightly harder to play than Soul Demon Hunter, which is why I put it below it, but overall, this deck has a lot of things going. It's got Barov and Libroom of Justice for good removal. It has big taunt minions like Devote Pupil, Libroom of Justice, and the Truth Seeker to stop you into Soul Demon Hunter and some aggro matchups. Wild Pyromancer with Lightforge Blessing destroys aggro, or Lightforge Blessing on Pupil or Libroom of Hope can destroy Bomb Warrior as well as just a huge health gain out of nowhere. Not to mention the fact that if you learn how to juggle Libroom of Wisdoms well, which means let's say you have 3 minions and 1 Libroom in hand, you Libroom, Penflinger hit, then Libroom, then it dies, then Libroom a new minion, Penflinger, hit the minion again, and just trade and get the most out of your Librooms and Penflingers. You can do a ton of damage. Not only that, but also remove the board if you combo with Libroom of Justice. It's just got, if you take the time to learn how to play this deck super optimally, you will perform with this deck. I'm currently 10-5 with it. It's a smaller sample size than Soul Demon Hunter, but it's been great, and last season I went 13-7 with it when I was still learning how to play it. So overall, very, very, very solid deck. Would highly recommend it. And it's kind of expensive, but not super. There are definitely more expensive decks out there. So let's jump into the next one. Small Spell Mage is the 3rd best deck, and like I said, it's very similar to Libroom Paladin, except for the fact that it has its main win condition decided by RNG, which I just don't personally like. I feel like I'll play really well, and sometimes I'll just lose because the evocation was garbage, or I didn't get anything good off of Magic Trick, or my Conjurer's Calling was really bad on Mana Giant, or Jandis got me some bad cards. So some of it is kind of dependent on RNG. Obviously, it's the most RNG based deck in the game. But despite that, you've got great early, mid, and okay late game, although you do run out of resources, you do run out of steam after a while. But early game, you can contest the board with not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 separate minions turns 1 and 2, or 5 actually with Wandmaker. You can contest the board with early. Chenvala, if you combo off with it, turn 4 or 5 with a Soul, or Sorcerer's Apprentice or the Coin or something, can be a good power play turn 4. You can get Mana Giant out relatively early as well, which can be a good mid-game, especially comboed with Conjurer's Calling. Jandis is the best 5-drop in the game. Ross, decent board wipe and good chip damage. And not to mention the fact that you have the best pool of 1-drop spells in the entire game. This deck's got a lot of things going for it. It's just a little too RNG for my taste, but it's not too expensive. It is rewarding to play well if you take the time to learn it, and overall, I would recommend this deck. It's also got decent card draw with Cram Session if you can get some spell damage minions out there. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. So we have Bomb Warrior as the next top tier deck that's like up here. Proven itself as a top tier deck, not including the 4 other ones that I'm going to talk about in a second. Bomb Warrior is a deck that I've played for a really long time and I absolutely love. It is probably one of my, if not my actual favorite decks to actually play. And if you learn how to play the matchups, it can win pretty much anything, right? If you want to keep, if you're into an aggro deck like Hunter, most notably, Shield Slam, Sword and Board, Whirlwind, Blade Storm, even Evil Quartermaster, very good into these matchups to just destroy the board and control it early. Another thing that you can do is you can, into slower matchups, keep the weapons and card draw and go for the late game play. And then the last thing that you do is into really slow matchups or the mirror match, keep Blastmaster Boom, because if you get him out on turn 7, even if it's just for a couple of bombs, can be the absolute change between a win or a loss. I think this deck has a lot of potential, and I don't feel like it destroys many matchups, although it does do well into Rogue and Mage, which is pretty solid. 50-50 into Demon Hunter, and then it loses to Paladin. But I think that if you learn how to play the matchups, they're all about 50% or better. It's like that deck that, if it's a triangle, rock, paper, scissors, right, like Mage beats Paladin, Paladin beats Demon Hunter beats Mage, Warrior's kind of the one in the middle that can like do okay into pretty much any matchup, but doesn't really smash any of them. So it's a good, well-rounded deck that can go face with your weapon or just control the board if you need to, depending on the matchup. And also, if you're into Demon Hunter, stealing the weapon's pretty big. And yeah, that's about it. This deck is just super well-rounded in my opinion. It's my favorite deck, and I would recommend it, although it is expensive, so there are other decks on this list for you if you need more of a cheap option. So, across the regions, if you look at the top 1,000 Legend players, Control Warrior is the best performing deck. This could be because of a small sample size, but I genuinely think this deck is really, really good. It's very hard to kill, and let's just look at the major matchups, right? The 4 main ones. Mage runs out of steam before they can kill you, and if they get out a couple of big minions, you have good removal to deal with them. Demon Hunter, you have a ton of armor, and the Bulwark can stop the big hits from the big minions like the Lapidary, Gladebound Adept, and their face. It can stall out for 2 even more turns sometimes. Although it does get countered by the Penflinger version, which can be problematic, but even so, it can still stall out for maybe 1 whole turn. Libroom Paladin, they draw a lot of cards, so you could win in Fatigue, although that matchup is kind of difficult. And then Bomb Warrior, it's kind of 50-50. You kind of just both do very little. You can steal and destroy their weapons so they don't put a ton of bombs in, and then you have a good late game win condition with Alexstrasza and Zephyrus. But if you don't draw the weapon removal and they get bombs in your deck, you might take a lot of damage, or if they get a good Blastmaster Boom out, it can be problematic. So overall, the main 4 matchups, you're favored in 2, pretty decent 50% in another, and then the last one is just Libroom Paladin. And Libroom Paladin, I feel like if you fully master it, should beat Warrior pretty much 100% of the time. Because Warrior has very few proactive things, and the Penflinger just does enough damage over time to kill you. But overall, this deck's really good. If you don't want to run the Body Wrapper or the Sticky Fingers, because 2 weapon removals can be a bit much sometimes, and the Body Wrapper is really a greedy option to try to get an extra Karagath, Kronks, Deathwing, Alexstrasza, Rattlegore, or Zephyrus. So like it's a greedy option to give you extra late game. If you don't want either of those, put in the Sword and Board because it's just a really good card to help into early game aggro. And that's about it. This is the best deck for the up and coming decks. So next is Galakrond Rogue. I think Galakrond Rogue is a very, very solid deck that gives you a ton of value in the late game with all of the lackeys that you're going to produce with both the Invoke and Galakrond. The power swings with this deck even after playing Galakrond into a 1-mana, say, Kronks or Togwoggle or Defender or Flick, depending on what you get. Especially if you play Pull Kilt early, can be absolutely massive. Like the swings with this deck, I've had games where I thought 1,000,000% I'd won. The game was over. And then boom, Kronks for 1 mana, Shadow Step, Kronks again, board wiped, he's left with a 6/6, and then he drops a card to Defender for 1 mana, and still also has enough mana to hero power and play a lackey. It's ridiculous. And I'm just sitting there like, my board's gone, everything was just destroyed, and he has good states on the board. Not to mention the fact that if you go into a slower deck like Priest, your lackeys generate you enough value to probably win the game most of the time. in mid and early game, if you can get out an early Edwin or questing adventure or get some good lackeys off of Evil Miscreant, or even just a good Jandis turn 5, the tempo with this deck is actually not bad. Also, you have 2 good 1-drops, Pharaohcat and Spy Mistress, which means that if you draw one of them early game, you're at least okay. And your turn 2 hero power has been widely considered one of the best hero powers in the game, just because it's a 2-turn thing. It's a whole weapon, so it's just in general good. And yeah, this deck has very few weak points, actually. I think that it's a really solid deck. It can be aggroed down really fast, I guess, because you don't have healing. But at least in a Demon Hunter, Carta Defender can stop them for at least 1 or 2 attacks, and a Frozen Shadow Weaver on turn 5 to stop Glavebound Adept, or the Lapidary, huge power plays, can stall you out just long enough to get to maybe Galakrond or Kronk's, or Carta Defender or whatever. Like, this deck, if you play it correctly, I think has a lot of potential. Well, I thought Druid was going to be dead after the nerfs, but Quest Druid has surprised me and probably the entire community. Basically, you give up the first 4 turns, hard mulliganing for Innervate, of course, to try to get the quest completed as quickly as possible, unless you're second and you have the coin, in which case you don't need Innervate, just so we're clear. And then boom, look at the power plays this deck has. Cenarius, Ysera, King Ferris for late game. Hidden Oasis, heal 12, get a 6/6 taunt. All aggro decks basically lose as soon as you play this. Turn 5, 10/10 rush. That's insane. Worst case scenario, turn 5, it can be like Gidra Rising Winds or Gidra Wrath for a 3/6 Wind Fury Rush minion and also some extra damage and a card draw. Like, as soon as you finish your quest, every single option is good. Every single option becomes so much better. Not to mention the fact that this deck has insane draw with Crystal Merchant, Rising Winds, Wrath, Nourish, not to mention Nature Studies and Worthy Expedition to draw you cards. And it just has good tempo plays, like as soon as you hit turn 5 and finish your quest. Like, it's insane. Lastly, into an aggro matchup if you need to, and you lose control of the board, or even just like a mid-range matchup, playing Hidden Oasis into a Defender into a Broomstick for 7 mana gets you a 6/6, a 3/5, and a 1/1 rush. Also combos well with Ysera or King Ferris if you have Innervate. A lot of cool things you can do with this Broomstick. I think it definitely deserves a spot in the deck. This is a really good deck, honestly. I think that it beats Demon Hunter if you can get the Hidden Oasis out on curve and heal up a ton. And yeah, that's about it. This deck beats that. It actually does well into Warrior, in my opinion, because if they don't have removal on these big swing turns, they just lose the next turn. It beats Mage, in my opinion, because you have heal and they run out of resources. And yeah, I think this deck just does really, really well. I absolutely love this deck. I'm currently like 5-2 with it. I've been loving it. Okay, so last is Dragon Priest. I think Dragon Priest is a very good deck, however, I'm putting it at the bottom because people don't like Priest very much, and rightfully so. It is fairly annoying, but I think it still deserves to be in the conversation of one of the best decks out there, and there are a couple of reasons why. 1, great removal, and really good into aggro-ish decks, or even Soul Demon Hunter. If you can Apotheosis out on a minion, or steal a big Lapidary, or Glavebound Adept, the board can be swung so quickly back in your favor, not to mention the fact that you can heal a ton so the damage you take isn't that bad. So good into aggro and kind of mid-range decks. And then into late game decks, this deck has random generation and resource generation that is rivaled by literally no other deck, even Mage, because Mage, even Evocation, it's just for the turn, whereas Priest, they steal cards, they generate cards, and they stay in the hand, they stay in the deck. It's crazy how powerful this deck can be if the game drags on. You just get so much value, and then if they have a big turn, you can respond with Murazond or Soul Mirror, you can steal some of their cards like I said, and overall I think this is just a really well-rounded deck that it doesn't have a main win condition other than the fact that it generates more value than almost any deck in the game, except for maybe Galakrond Rogue, surprisingly enough. I think Galakrond Rogue rivals this just because of how many lackeys you can generate. But it is close, and I do think that this deck and Galakrond Rogue both deserve to be on this top 8 list because they've both been performing exceptionally well recently. Since the nerfs, new decks have come out, and these have been just some of those really good decks. So I hope you guys enjoy. If you do, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It's the best way to help and support me. And Also, check me out on Twitch if you like seeing people get mad at Hearthstone live and talking about some of the problems, or also just talking about how good they are at the game sometimes and things go my way. When I get a good read and I'm like, oh my goodness, I just knew he was going to do that. It's a fun time. So if you guys enjoyed, I'll see you in the next one. And if you have any questions or any decks you think I missed, please let me know, and I will take a look at them for the next tier list, because I'm going to do this every single week. See you in the next one.